My name is Robert Perry. I'm here in the home of Lawrence Wayne Seguin in Ventura, California. On behalf of the Conejo Valley chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution, I'm here to interview Larry for the Library of Congress Veterans History Project. Today's date is March 13th, 2015. Larry served honorably in the United States Marine Corps and later in the Marine Corps Reserve for a total of 11 years. He is a combat decorated veteran of the Vietnam War.
As we begin this, I would like to make a few things clear. I've been asked by the Daughters of the American Revolution to speak a little bit about my life, about my time in the United States Marine Corps, and touch in particular upon my time in Vietnam. As I tell my story, I'd like it to be known that some parts might sound bragging or braggadocio. Some parts might sound like degradation, self-degradation. This is not the case. All I'm trying to do is present facts of my life in as straightforward a manner as possible, so people can understand what I've been through and what other guys, such as myself, who have been through combat, extensive combat, what we went through and want people to understand. So all I'm doing is presenting the facts as I know them. Start with, my name is Lawrence Wayne Seguin. I'm known as Larry. Some of my friends and business associates from when I used to work call me Sarge. That was my highest rank attained in the Marine Corps. I was born a long, long time ago in a very distant land. Mostly, it was on another planet, but it was December 1st, 1944. I was born in Detroit, Michigan. My mother and father were very self-propagating. My mother had 14 pregnancies. I was the first one. And to make it real short and condense it, I don't want to get into too deep into specifics, medical specifics, but out of those 14 pregnancies, 3 were, we'll just say, stillborn, and 3 died at birth. 8 of us survived. Again, I was the oldest. My brother Ron was born in 1948. My brother Ken was born in 1950. Then a sister, Mary Ellen, was born in 1952. Then a brother Tom in 54. My second sister in 1957. My brother Dan in 1962. And my youngest brother David in 1967. So there were 6 boys and 2 girls in the family. It kind of coincided with my mother and father's life. They both came from very large families. My father was born in 1919 in Montreal, Canada, and he was one of 7 children. My mother was born in 1925 in Ohio. She was one of 9 children. And as you can see, many children came amongst both families. My father was a military man, and that's probably where some of us got our military heritage, so to speak, and encouraging us to follow in our father's footsteps and serve our country. My father was a decorated soldier, served in Europe during World War II. Because his first language was French, although he was fluent in English and French both. I mean, he was born speaking French in Montreal. And he found out he had an affinity for languages. And even though he didn't finish high school, when he joined the Army, he went to Europe and found out he had an affinity for learning languages and learned German besides French to a certain extent. Not as much, but enough so that after the war ended, he was kept on the occupation forces and serving as an interpreter in France and Germany, and he didn't come home until 1946. So I was going on 2 years old before I got a chance to see my father for the first time. My mother spent her life as a housewife and homemaker. We had a pretty close-knit family growing up. I adored my father, but he was a rough man to deal with. And I didn't realize until much later in my life, until actually just in the last few years that probably some of the reasons of his roughness and why we bumped heads a little bit was, it wasn't known as that then, but I came to believe that my father suffered from PTSD because of all the action he saw and his decorations he received from World War II. And that made things a lot clearer for me, but there's nothing I could do about it when I finally realized that's probably what caused some of his problems, because he died in 1994 at 75 years of age. I went to a Catholic school for 12 years. I was pretty much a straight A student. And we lived in the suburbs of Detroit, and I chose to go to high school down in the inner city, Detroit, because it was so highly academically rated. I was on honor rolls all through grade school and high school. When I graduated from Holy Redeemer High School in 1963, I had a full-ride academic scholarship to college, and I was really torn on what I wanted to do. I had worked my way through high school, working in a supermarket, and I didn't know if I wanted to go to college. 12 years of a Catholic school was weighing on me. I was kind of burnt out on school. The idea of getting a free ride in college was enticing. I also was working full-time. And at that time, there was 3 options open to all of us. Those 2 options, college and working, or joining the military. And I tested for the United States Marine Corps, and I tested for the United States Air Force. I passed with very high scores on both tests, and I was kind of leaning towards that, one or the other, because by that time, I had pretty much made up my mind that I had had enough education for a while. So I wound up going down and seeing a Marine Corps gunnery sergeant and telling him I wanted to enlist in the Marine Corps. That was 2.5 weeks after I graduated from high school. On June 9th, I graduated, and on June 26th, I got sworn into the Marine Corps Reserves. The reason for being sworn in the reserves was at that time they would not just put you right into active duty, because that meant you had to leave for boot camp right away, and they weren't, at that time Michigan was sending all their recruits, Marine recruits, to San Diego as opposed to Parris Island, which is the other Marine Corps boot camp. And so we're going to San Diego, but they had to get enough people signed up for active duty for 4 years to put them all on a plane together, because they weren't going to send one of us at a time. It was too expensive. So I had to wait 4 months until a group grew big enough to send us all at once. And on October 17th, all of us were called down to the federal building in Detroit. We were discharged from the reserves and sworn into active duty. The good thing about it was we had all signed up for a 6-year commitment, and so we already had 4 months done of our 2 years reserve time was already gone. We didn't have to attend any meetings or anything, so it was great. We could work, go on vacation, do whatever we wanted. I like to tell a story about myself. I guess you might say I kind of made fun of myself for telling this story, but it's all right, because I thought I had enough schooling, enough education after studying so hard through all those years in Catholic school, and I said, I'm smart enough right now. I don't need no more education. And I showed him how smart I was, because 2 years later I wound up in Vietnam, so maybe I wasn't as smart as I thought I was. But anyhow, be that as it may, I picked the Marine Corps because I thought it would be more of a challenge. I thought it would make more of a man of me. Not that somebody serving in any other services is any less a man, but I felt it was the right service for me. And to this day, I do not regret anything about my choice to join the Marine Corps. I did get my college later on. I went to college in the 1970s, and It was a long time between college and high school, but a lot developed in my life during them, which I'll discuss a little later. But
Yeah, would you mind telling us what kind of work you did part-time while you're going through high school and a little bit after that?
yes, I was working in a supermarket. I started working with my father, who was in the grocery business, and he went into the grocery business after World War II. And I actually started working on weekends taking carryouts at a supermarket when I was 12 years old. And it was totally illegal, but since my father was a supervisor at the store, I got away with it. Basically, I made tips taking carryouts. Detroit was a factory town, and we had steel mills and, of course, the automobile industry. And it was great because people came to shop, and the husbands never came. They gave the wives their paychecks, said go buy groceries for 2 weeks till the next check comes in. And I'd help these ladies out their car, and I'd make myself $10 on a weekend. And $10 on a weekend back in 1956, 57 was a lot of money for a young boy. And then when I turned 14, which I was still in the 8th grade, I got a work permit, which allowed me to legally punch a clock at the grocery store. And I became a stock clerk and cashier and working in the produce department. When I turned 15, my father was working 7 days a week. He's a very hardworking man because of a large family. And he felt that I knew enough about the produce end of the business that he could take a day off. So he started taking Sundays off, and at 15 years old, I was running the produce department and dairy department in the supermarket. And it was challenging, but I felt up to it. And in 1961, I went to work in a full chain supermarket as a stock clerk and cashier, and worked my way through high school that way. So I could help pay for my tuition and my books, and bought my own clothes. And it was pretty, it established a baseline for me of the thinking that hard work is the way a person is brought up, and what they should always strive for, to work and be self-supporting, which I still believe to this day. And I eventually tried to instill all this in my own kids, even though I had some personal problems, which I will also discuss later. I tried to get them to understand that they needed to find something they liked in life and work at it to better themselves and make a living and pay their taxes and be a part of productive society. So I was fortunate enough that I learned that from my father, and at a young age,
Right.
and was able to progress from there in a positive manner.
Okay. Getting back to your enlistment, could you tell us the reason why you chose the Marine Corps instead of the Air Force?
I felt that really, some guys say, well, I thought they had the best looking uniforms, and they probably do. That's being a Marine yourself, Bob, you know what I'm talking about.
Right.
Marines standing there in their dress blues, everybody jaws just drop open. But I thought I had a better chance to see the world. I thought the training would be much tougher, and I was looking for that because even though I had some good athletic abilities through high school, I had to devote myself to my studies to maintain my my honors average, and so I had to give up sports activities. And I thought the Marine Corps could toughen me up, strengthen me up, and give me the principles that you read about, and you've read stories about World War II and Korea and how the Marines excelled in fighting for their country. And I wanted to be a part of that tradition. And that spoke volumes to me over and above the decision to join the Air Force. So that's why I chose the Marines over the Air Force.
Thank you. Tell me about your departure for training camp and early days of training. What was that like? MCRD San Diego and the DIs and all that sort of thing.
Oh yeah, the plane landed in San Diego at nighttime, and They had what we call cattle cars waiting to pick us up. We're all crammed into the cattle cars and taken out to the base and unloaded and told to stand in the famous yellow footprints. And you've been there, so you know what I'm talking about. And that's when the military life began in earnest. And this is kind of another funny story about myself. My introduction to active duty. I was standing, we were in, trying to remember, there's 5 long lines, I think, with 14 or 15, no, maybe 16 guys in each line. And of course, they had all these DIs there. There was probably 5 of them. And they were walking around and telling us what a sorry bunch we were. And they doubt if any of us would be able to make it through boot camp. And screaming and yelling at us. And I happened to be on the far left line, a column, and I looked over in the middle column. A couple people in front of me was a DI, and he had his Smokey Bear on, and he was screaming in this one guy's face, one recruit, and he was going like nodding his head, and that Smokey Bear was hitting this guy in the nose, and the guy's bridge of his nose started to bleed, and the guy put his hand up, went like this, and DI screamed, "Put your hand down! I didn't tell you you could put your hand up to your face. You don't move unless I tell you to move." And for some reason, I thought that was the funniest thing I had ever seen or heard in my life, and I started to crack up. I was laughing my royal butt off. And all of a sudden, there was a Marine gunnery sergeant standing in front of me and said, "Do you think this is funny, maggot?" And I looked and I said, "Yeah, you see what he's doing?" And it's the last thing I remember. The next thing I remember, I woke up, I was on the ground, and the same gunnery sergeant standing over me, and everybody else is gone. And he said, "Get on your feet, you're about to run." And I had a real sore jaw. And he ran me all the way to where everybody else was getting their gear handed out. So that was my introduction to active duty. I'll never forget it. What I thought was a big joke turned out to be not so funny after all. In those days, Marine Corps boot camp was 14 weeks, at the end of which time you immediately went up to Camp Pendleton for 4 weeks of ITR, which was the Infantry Training Regiment. It's called something different now. I think it's Advanced Infantry Training or School of Infantry or something, but it was ITR back then. And that's where you went through the training you were actually going to receive to put you out in the fleet Marines, who were the grunts serving around the world. And that's where you got your real training, more towards combat, whereas San Diego at boot camp was more instructional. It was learning the history of the Marine Corps. It was physical training. It was marksmanship. It was Marine Corps history and traditions. It was just another long school, hard school, because it was physically demanding besides being mentally demanding. And Camp Pendleton turned out to be more of what you could expect out in the active Marine Corps. At the end of that, which was a total of 18 weeks, they gave us 20 days leave.
Okay. Very good. After you graduated from ITR, you were assigned a specialty where you had to go to school for that?
Yes. At that time, the Marine Corps had their specialized school in communications and electronics at San Diego. MCRD was actually a twofold Marine base. It was Marine boot camp, and it had the communications electronics school. That's the two main functions it served. And I had orders to check back into communication electronics school at the end of my 20-day leave. the reason for this was, I believe, had directly to do with the scores and various areas I tested in my Marine Corps test to see if I was worthy to join the Marines. And by the way, if I can regress back, one of the greatest days of my life was the day of graduation, standing on that parade deck at MCRD and officially being greeted as a Marine. I could almost cry thinking about that. I made it. And you know, the first few weeks you have doubts. But to actually be called a Marine, what a feeling that was. So checking back in the Communication Electronics School, I didn't have to stop anymore and ask permission to run by somebody that was already in the Marine Corps because I was a Marine myself. So it was a good feeling. And during the time I was there, I had gone about 2/3 of the way through the school, and I was involved in an incident, not of my making. There was some race relation problems between blacks and whites and between the Navy and the Marine Corps back in the early 60s and mid-60s. And I was coming home from a dance on a weekend at 32nd Street Naval Base.
This in San Diego?
In San Diego.
It's from communication school, right? When you were down there?
Pardon me?
When you were in communication school.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Well, we had weekends off, and it was a Saturday night, and I was coming back from this dance, and as I walked back, I was going up to catch a bus back to base, and a bunch of who later identified by witnesses as black sailors came out of an alley and jumped me, 5 of them, and put me in Balboa Naval Hospital for 6.5 weeks with a broken jaw, compound fracture of the jaw, and multiple facial fractures, and came close to losing an eye, and I was pretty much out of it for quite a while, and then I had to go back to a battalion where they put me in, where I had to recover and wait for another class, communications class, to start. And so I wound up being at the school for close to a year, just about 1 year. There was 44 of us in the class, and I did well. I graduated 5th. The top 5 of us were within partial percentage points of each other. We were given a list of duty stations that required our MOS, and primary MOS that we were given with 2533, which is radio telegraph operator. You know, and learned to type. Well, I had the headphones on, it was all Morse code and everything. We also learned how to operate all military communication devices, whether handheld, carrying a pack on your back, large, small, mobile communication devices on Jeeps, mounted on Jeeps or in trucks. It was very, very extensive. So they gave us a list that require us to know all these things with our MOS of duty stations around the world. And everybody got the list, and I was looking at it, and one jumped out at me. And that was Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii. And I thought, oh, wow, Hawaii. And I had these dreams, I can get to go to Hawaii. I'll go there for probably 3 years or the rest of my enlistment if I'm lucky, and just spend the time there. I can take night classes at University of Hawaii and start getting some of them college. I had all these big plans.
Now, what month and year was this at that time?
This was in February of 1965.
Oh, yes. Okay.
All right. And then I got to thinking, oh, I've got 4 guys picking in front of me. I'm never going to get Hawaii. And lo and behold, it turns out on that list, and there was 44 of us, and there was, I think, close to 100 duty stations that needed our MOS. There was 4 duty stations that were at embassy duty at embassies around the world. And in those days, the only ways you could get free dress blues on embassy duty or sea duty. And all 4 of the guys that graduated in front of me chose embassy embassy duty, and I got to pick Hawaii. So I got orders to Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii, to join 4th Marines. I went home on leave. While I'm home on leave, newspaper headlines came out. Big type on the Detroit News, Detroit Free Press. 5,000 Marines land in Da Nang, South Vietnam. It said how all these Marines had been pulled out of Okinawa and put into this country called South Vietnam. Now, I'd remembered the previous year while I was in communications school, they had what they called the Tonkin Bay incident, where North Vietnamese PT boats had attacked U.S. ships. Didn't think a whole lot of it at the time, but unbeknownst to me, but not unknown to our government, there was a lot of other things going on. We had some troops in Vietnam, not real combat troops. We had advisors along with the Army Special Forces. We had Marine advisors, and we had in 1962 they sent over a helicopter squadron to aid the ARVN, Army Republic of Vietnam, ARVN, and transporting supplies and troops and so on and so forth. So we had a few people there in support capacity, but no combat troops. So I'm thinking, when I see these headlines, boy, I'm glad I got orders to Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii, and I'm not going there. I wasn't scheduled to go to Okinawa. So at the end of my leave in March, I checked into staging battalion at Camp Pendleton in anticipation of going to Hawaii. My first morning there, fell out for formation, and if they took roll call, it said, everybody that's got orders to Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii, report over so-and-so. We reported over so-and-so. Some colonel came out to talk to us and said, good news was we were still going overseas. The bad news was we weren't going to Hawaii. We had orders changing, sending us to Okinawa. And what had not been in the newspaper was that when the 3rd Marines and 9th Marine Regiment, those 2 regiments were sent to Vietnam, they had quietly packed up the 4th Marines from Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii, and shipped them to Okinawa. So we went over on an old rusty converted freighter, and we left San Diego. Some of these dates that I give might be part of a recollection that's many years old, but I know it was about the last week of March when we set out from San Diego. We were aboard ship for 23 days. We sailed from San Diego into Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Made it to Hawaii for 1 day of liberty, 24 hours liberty. We got back on ship, and we sailed to Yokohama, Japan. We got 24 hours liberty in Yokohama, Japan. Back aboard ship and sailed into Okinawa. For the next 10 days, we underwent very intense training. I joined them. They were already part of this training, and I just got inserted in the middle of it, and it was night and day. We weren't getting much sleep. It was jungle training, foreign weapons training. It was every kind of training imaginable.
Well, while we're on that subject, what were you like physically at that time? Height, weight, strength, that kind of thing?
Well, when I went into boot camp, I was 5'9", 125 pounds. When I got out of boot camp, I was 5'9", 135 pounds. I had put on a lot of muscle, and I was in much better physical shape when I left boot camp than when I had gone in, obviously. And we had regular PT while I was in communication. It wasn't just classes. I mean, we had to maintain our Marine Corps standards of physical fitness. So there was PT every day, all the various exercises and running and so on and so forth. So I was physically fit when I arrived in Okinawa. Even aboard ship every day was physical training. And after I had been training with, I had been assigned to 2nd Battalion of the 4th Marines, and we were put back aboard ship We were aboard ship for 5 days. So it must have been May 2nd when we were left Okinawa aboard ship, because on May 7th, 1965, 0800 in the morning, we went ashore at Chu Lai, Vietnam. We were in Amtrak's. I was the commanding officer, one of his personal radio operators. Was something I was very proud of. I heard a lot about him after I had joined the 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines. He was a legend in the Marine Corps. His name was Lieutenant Colonel Joseph R. Bull Fisher. Everybody called him the Bull. It's a name he picked up. He started out as a private in World War II, fought in Korea, and he got a battlefield commission in World War II, and second lieutenant. And by the time we landed in Vietnam, he was lieutenant colonel and battalion commander.
So you were assigned as a battalion radio operator then?
And I was battalion radio operator, and I was one of the colonel's personal radio operators. He had 3 or 4 personal radio operators assigned just to him, for the main reason that we carried different types of radios, and the different types of radios had frequencies that hooked up with various other Marine Corps agencies, so that he could talk to these agencies on any given radio at any time.
Such as air, for example.
I'm sorry?
Such as air, for example.
Yeah, you had air communication, you had local communication, you had to communicate with regimental headquarters, you had to communicate with 3rd Marine Division.
Now, when you came ashore, how heavy was the radio that you were carrying?
It was actually a light one. When we landed, I was carrying a very old radio. It was called a Prick 10, PRC-10. PRC stood for Portable Radio Communication. And it was carried in a rucksack in the back along with all your other equipment. And the Prick 10 didn't weigh all that much. I don't think it weighed somewhere between 10 and 20 pounds. It was a fairly light radio. And I had an extra battery with it too. So
with all your other gear.
Yeah, along with all my other gear, of course. And at that time, my other gear consisted of all the normal 782 gear, web gear, M14 rifle with extra magazines, and a bayonet for the M14. And another funny bit here. We were all scared. I mean, we had a lot of battle-hardened veterans that were the leaders, the older officers, your gunnery sergeants, first sergeants. Some of them were, the older ones were World War II veterans. Some of them were, many were Korean veterans. Some of them had been through both wars. And they had us primed to hit the beach at Chu Lai in these Amtrak's. Everybody was locked and loaded, and we were scared crapless. And we were told, we're given a signal. The ramp was going to go down the Amtrak's. As the ramps went down, we were to take our safeties off and rush ashore and spread out and be ready for anything. So all that unfolded, and we rushed out, all these Amtrak's troops spreading out. And there on the beach was NBC, ABC, and CBS all set up with their cameras, filming the landing. They had Vietnamese girls that they had dressed up in Hawaiian hula skirts, sarongs, and they were coming up and putting flowered leis around our necks. One of the most embarrassing moments of my life. Not just my military life, and my whole life. Here we were expecting, enemies to be shooting at us with everything under the sun, and instead we're being welcomed by the national networks and girls in hula skirts. By the way, I might mention too, on the way from the ship to the shore, that was May 7th, 1965. My mother and father were married on May 7th, 1943. So that day was their 22nd wedding anniversary. And I can remember all the way to shore, the foremost thought in my mind was dear God, if I'm going to die in this place, don't let it be today. If I'm going to be killed, let it be tomorrow. I don't want to die on my mother and father's wedding anniversary.
Right.
That was the foremost thought in my mind. It's crazy thinking about it now. I didn't care if I was going to be killed. I just didn't want it to be that one day.
Makes complete sense to me. Now tell me about Chulai. When you got there, what was there?
Nothing. Chulai was, I guess to use a modern term, was kind of a hole-in-the-wall place. It wasn't. Now, we call it Chulai. We landed on the beach. The actual village of Chulai was on Highway 1, which was inland a little bit, and a little bit to the north of where we landed. But where we landed, the 2nd Battalion of the 4th Marines, and by the way, the other 2 battalions, the 1st Battalion and 3rd Battalion, came in by chopper off of carriers and landed in other parts of the area there. And those 2 battalions were going to provide outer security. We were going to provide inner security for NMCB-10, Naval Mobile Construction Battalion 10, who landed 2 hours after us, came in at 1000 hours, and their job was to build an airstrip at Chulai because the government, in their infinite wisdom, knew that there was a war coming, a shooting war, and it would probably escalate, and that the airfield at Da Nang, which was 60 miles north of Chulai, straight up Highway 1, as big as it was, it probably couldn't accommodate enough air power for what they figured was a coming war. So the Seabees were going to come in and build a complete airfield at Chulai. And that's where I learned an immense respect for the Navy Seabees. It was either 26 or 27 days. They built a complete airfield with control tower, barracks, all support facilities, everything. Less than 4 weeks, and I believe it's on the 27th day, MAG-16 flew their planes in and landed at Chulai. 27 days after we hit there, and there was nothing but sand. So to this day, I have such respect for Navy Seabees, and of course, Navy corpsmen who served with us.
Okay.
But that's why we landed where we did, was provide security for the Seabees. After everything was established, the battalion moved inland. Actually, we went west of Highway 1 and went inland, I want to say about 2 miles to a hill that was designated Hill 69. And that's where we set up battalion headquarters. It was an easy position to defend, and there was a couple of hills. We had some facilities set down in the valley between, and we controlled all the high ground in the area. And that's where we stayed until the end of March of 1966. And we conducted all our operations, search and destroy missions, recon patrols, set up booby traps, interrogated the locals. Anything that was in the military book, we conducted those type of operations out of Chulai, out of Hill 69.
Okay, so actually you witnessed, and your duties were frontline, and you didn't have people putting laser on your necks anymore. It was a lot different.
No, that was a one-day thing, and it was, I don't know where the orders came from, but we didn't see anything else like that the rest of the time we were there.
Right. Tell me what you did see.
We did see more photographers and cameramen from the stations. It wasn't called embedded like it is today, where they just travel with troops. They would get helicoptered in, maybe in when there was a lull in a battle or something. We learned to hate those guys. They were always underfoot. We hated the press. But everything else we saw was, let me put it this way, for the first 3 months we were there, from May 7th until the middle of August, we were filling sandbags, building fortifications, setting up communications, getting ourselves ready in case a war really broke out and we were immersed in the middle of it. And that eventually happened in the middle of August. And I'm proud to say I was part of the first big battle of the Vietnam War, which was Operation Starlight, for 3 days in the middle of August of 1965.
What rank were you at that time?
At that time, I was a PFC. I think I was one of the senior PFCs in the Marine Corps at the time. And because of that, anytime the colonel wanted to put a group together, I was always put in charge because we had so many privates and PFCs were stumbling over each other, and I was a senior one, so the colonel always put me in charge of whatever he wanted us to do.
All right, so tell me what happened after that, once the war really started.
That was... let me backtrack just about 1 week. About 1 week before Operation Starlight, we were on a it was a partial battalion. I think we had 2 or 3 companies. Our battalion. We were told that there was a number of VC in a particular area, and we went out on foot. And the colonel said it'd probably take us a couple of days to get to the area that we had heard there was a strong VC presence.
Now, was the colonel coming along when all this was going on?
He was a lead from the front type of leader, which gave him even more respect from all of us. He wasn't giving orders from the rear. He was up front all the time.
Which meant you were up front all the time with his radios.
Yeah, we were joined at the hip. I was always joined at the hip with the CO whenever we went out on any operation, because he needed instant communication if he had to call in an airstrike or naval air support or just support fire from helicopters or A4s or F4s. He had to be on that radio immediately. So, yeah.
Okay.
Well, we were on this operation, and we were sweeping across all these rice paddies, moving towards a tree line behind which there was a small village. And we got, I'm going to say, maybe 150 to 200 yards from the tree line, and all of a sudden, the tree line erupted in gunfire, and we were taking small arms fire, machine gun fire, and it was the first time that the vast majority of us had ever been shot at. Now, of course, your senior officers and enlisted men had already seen combat. The rest of us were down with just our noses out of water in the rice paddies.
What was the colonel doing?
The colonel and the first sergeant had their backs to the village, walking up and down the dikes that intersected the rice paddies, screaming at us, yelling at us, calling us names, saying, what were we doing hiding in the water when the enemy was in front of us? And eventually, everybody started to come out of the water because we were more afraid of the colonel than we were of the incoming fire. Now, I'm going to relate an incident that happened right then as we were coming out of the rice paddies. This may be a little difficult. I hope I can get through it okay. I can tell you, before I started getting help from the VA 3 years ago, that I could not be telling this part of my service. I can talk about it somewhat now, a little more openly. As we were coming up out of the water, I had a Marine grunt next to me. He was an infantryman, and we were side by side coming up, listening to the colonel, and he took a round through his head, and I got his brain matter and piece of his skull hit me on the shoulder. That didn't register right then. All I could think of was I saw him sink into the water. My only thought, thank you, God, that that wasn't me. It's the first time I'd seen anybody get killed, and it was right next to me. And then training kicked in because everybody's screaming at us, and we got up and in line and we marched into that ville. And by the time we got there, the overwhelming firepower that we had driven the VC out, and they had all disappeared. And we searched and cleared the village, and then the colonel said, okay, we're going to take 15 minutes. And one of the other radio operators came up to me and looked, and he says, what have you got all over your shoulder? And I said, where? He said, right there. And I looked, and I saw all this. And I flashed back to when it happened and remembered. And at that point, I got violently ill.
Understandable.
And I just started to throw up, and I kept throwing up. There was nothing left of me. And I was shaking. Sit down. I couldn't move. It was just overwhelming. And a corpsman came over and asked me if they needed to do for me. And he gave me something, had me swallow it for nausea. And then the colonel told us, okay, everybody mount up, we're moving out. And then the training just kicked in, and I had to put that behind me because we were going to try and chase the enemy. And there wasn't a place in my life at that moment in my mind to think about that. It's something I learned later on about combat. You compartmentalize things, and you concentrate on what has to be concentrated on at any given moment, because you have goals. You're supposed to find the enemy. You're supposed to destroy the enemy. You're supposed to protect the Marine to your right and left, all your buddies. You accomplish a mission above all while protecting your fellow Marines. And really, to get through the whole time I spent in Vietnam, even though things happened after that that involved much more violence, including personal hand-to-hand combat with the enemy, you learn to keep on going, but eventually it catches up with you. And it didn't catch up with me until civilian life. But that first time seeing somebody get killed was absolutely mind-numbing at that moment. Especially when it was pointed out, what is that on your shoulder?
Completely understandable.
To this day, I get queasy thinking about it.
We were about to talk about Operation Starlight.
Yeah, Operation Starlight. That was a week after this patrol that I just told you about. We had hard intel, unlike a lot of the bad intel we got during that war, which I know you're familiar with. Bad intel was everywhere during the war. But this was hard intel that there were a couple of emplaced, reinforced VC battalions. Now, this is when we were still fighting. The VC was our enemy. Okay, and the VC was everybody. They could be part of the hardcore battalions that had been trained, that had training by North Vietnam, or they could be the guy out in the rice paddies with the oxen, plowing the rice paddies, planting rice, and at night they could be out setting land traps, land mines, probing your lines, do anything during the night. You didn't know who the enemy was, who was your friend, who was not your friend. There was even infiltrators in the ARVN troops. But But this intelligence we got said 2 entrenched VC battalions. So I might mention that during that summer, I believe it was in June and July, the 1st Marine Division from Camp Pendleton joined the 3rd Marine Division that I was in, and we were already there. We landed in March and May of '65, and they came in June and July. So we had 2 full Marine combat infantry battalions by the end of July. So in the middle of August, this
You meant divisions, didn't you?
Pardon me?
You meant divisions, didn't you?
Yeah, there was 2 divisions.
Right.
Yeah, which comprised 3 infantry regiments in each one. So 2 full divisions plus all supporting units gave us, not to mention the air wing, gave us a lot of presence in Vietnam with a lot of firepower available to us. And so when this hardcore intel came in about these 2 VC battalions, I'm pretty sure I'm getting these figures right, 2 VC battalions. And they were south of Chulai. And I don't remember how many battalions were involved. I want to say it was at least 5 Marine battalions. Some in the 1st Division, some from the 3rd Division. And we landed in various parts surrounding the area and used pincer movements and so on and so forth to try and attack these guys. And that turned out to be the first major battle of the war because they were trained to stand and fight, just as we were. And there was a lot of hand-to-hand fighting going on. There was trenches built, bunkers, fighting holes, everything imaginable. It was just like walking into a Marine camp. They had everything that a normal military group would have, a military fighting group. And it took 3 days to subdue them, or we could say we had achieved victory.
Was that Operation Starlight?
I'm sorry?
Was that Operation Starlight?
Yes, it is. That was Operation Starlight. I want to try and give the correct dates. I could be off by 1 day, but I think it was August 16th, 17th, and 18th of 1965. And compared to that incident the week before, this was all-out battle. It's what we had trained for, what we kind of expected eventually to happen. But you can't really prepare yourself for that. When it happens, it unfolds and you react as you have to react in the way you were trained. But it's still an experience that it's hard to describe, because when you're training for it, it's like maybe what today would be considered to be playing a video game. You're doing all this training, but nobody's dying. When it really happens, people are dying, and they're not getting up from the ground. They're dead. They're dead forever. Dead is forever. There's no coming back from it. So when you're seeing it, and your fellow Marines are dying, and the enemy's dying, it's permanent. And seeing that for 3 solid days around the clock, there was no sleeping. We were awake the whole time, fighting. And even the headquarters group that I was part of, with the colonel, who was right in the middle of the fighting, the headquarters group, the radio operators, the corpsmen were pretty busy patching up, but literally everybody was firing their weapon at the enemy. And that was our introduction to war and what war is really about. I've often told people that all wars are the same. Good men from both sides get killed, but they're good men because they believe in what they're fighting for. Maybe not so much today with the Islamic jihadists, but in the other wars we've known, the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and everything on both sides believed in what they were doing. The only thing different about any war is where the battleground is located and what the weapons are that are being used. Other than that, all wars are the same. People die. So that was our introduction to war in the battle called Starlight. And I'm sure every man that was there or in any other battle in any war remembers those various battles, and it stays with them forever and ever and ever. And some people adapt to it, and some people have problems that develop later in life because of what they see, what they undergo, sometimes what they have to participate in. There are horrors in war that people that haven't been there would never understand. That's why warriors that have been there can't talk to those people. They wouldn't understand. It's something that's beyond their dull day-to-day life.
Now, you were in several other operations after Starlight, I see, such as Operation Utah, Operation Texas, Operation Double Eagle 1 and 2, Operation Massachusetts. Are any of those that stood out in your mind that you'd like to tell us about?
Utah and Texas were very, very bad. Those both took place in March of 1966.
Did you have the same colonel at that time?
No. We actually had a new colonel that came aboard, and I want to say it was December of 65 or January of 66, probably closer to 1st of January of 66. And I got to be one of his personal radio operators, and this man was another legend in the Marine Corps. Lieutenant Colonel P.X. Kelly, who went on to become a 4-star general and became Commandant of the Marine Corps. And
did he lead from the front too?
He led from the front. He was
That means
a
you were right up there
warrior
with him.
that I admired that man, and I admire him to this day. We still exchange communications. I have something here I'm pretty proud of. This took place Memorial Weekend in 1994. This is General P.X. Kelly, the former commandant. This is me. I dressed blues. I was life member of the Marine Corps League, and the Marine Corps League was asked to be a color guard before the general spoke at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California. He was the guest speaker, and as part of the color guard, they knew that I had served as his radio operator in Vietnam, even though I had left him in the bush about 18 years before this, and we had lost all communications with each other. And they made sure that I had a seat in the front row, right in front of the podium where he was speaking. And all through his talk, he kept looking down at me like, I know that guy from somewhere. I just kept smiling back at him. And when he was done with his speech, he took questions and answered. And my hand shot right up. And I said, I said, General, I said, you probably don't remember me, but in Vietnam in 1966, I was your personal radio operator. My name is Larry Seguin. And he says, Seguin, I knew I remembered you from somewhere. And when the question and answer period was all over with, and he came down to meet the audience, first thing he did was come running across to me, and we just gave each other a big hug, and I don't think either one of us was ashamed to say we had tears in our eyes. But that was really great. Now, we exchanged Christmas cards, and I've had the pleasure of meeting up with him one other time at the Reagan Library with his wife, Barbara, and who's a wonderful lady, and the colonel is just a man. I say the colonel, he was general. To me, he was lieutenant colonel because we fought the war together. And but that was great getting to meet him at that time. But Texas and Utah were two very, very outrageous battles. Both involved hand-to-hand fighting. I mentioned earlier how bad intel was such a big part of our life. I believe it was Operation Utah, which was, I believe the Army was even involved in this. It was a huge operation. And our battalion, 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, came down on what was supposed to be a secure area. And as we were landing, the whole world blew up around us. And I think we were landing in the middle of a North Vietnamese Army headquarters and reinforced, and we were just getting pounded. And
so by this time you were dealing with regular NVA then?
Oh yes, yeah. By the time, I want to say, as far as full skirmishes go, that was in effect by before the end of 1965. We were fighting the North Vietnamese Army. The VC, by that point, were put into a secondary role in the war. They would set booby traps, harass us at night with maybe dropping a few mortar rounds on us, which were wildly inaccurate, unless you happen to be unlucky. And the NVA were conducting the war. And these troops were trained just like we were. And so fighting them was a little different than fighting the VC, particularly when you got into the hand-to-hand stuff. When you're fighting with an enemy that's been trained like you've been trained, you could only react quick and hope that your training was a little bit better. And I don't know how to put this, it put a whole different scope on the war when we were fighting the NVA, because we knew we were going up against trained troops and strategies had to change a little bit. And all those battles from December of '66 on were possibly by the end of November, were against a trained, regulated army.
Right, you meant 65, right?
Pardon me?
You meant 65, right?
Yeah, what did I say?
December of 65 on.
Yeah, December of '65.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
From that point on, possibly even by the end of November, it was the NVA that was the enemy.
So Operation Texas and Utah were both NVA then?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because that wasn't until March of '66.
Right, okay.
Operation Double Eagle 1, I want to say, I could be off, it was November, December, maybe even beginning of January. Some dates get a little fuzzy after so many years. I mean, this is what, today's March 13th, and 2 months it'll be 50 years ago that I landed, so some things diminish a little bit with age.
Okay. You can say as much or a little more that you want to say about combat. If you have any more to say, go ahead with that, or else we can just move on.
The things that I saw, that I was witness to on both sides, on the U.S. side and on the enemy side, on the South Vietnamese Army side, there were atrocities committed, there was torture, there was murder, and then there was just the day-to-day killing to stay alive. But collectively, all of these things will leave a mark on each individual that will be there forever. Some people will react differently to the things they've seen and done and participated in or witnessed than others will. There's just, it's human nature. I mean, people react differently to different things. And when I came back to the United States, I was able to function, but even then, when I came home, I started drinking pretty heavy. I was still in the Marine Corps, but I was drinking heavy because I was functioning good during the day. I was leading my troops, but at nighttime, I was drinking because the nightmares had begun. Nightmares about what I had seen, what I had done, the hand-to-hand battles. At that time, the flashbacks hadn't started, where I was transported back in time. That came later on. I had to be a good Marine when I came back. I still had about 18 months or so, 17 or 18 months to do on my 4 years of active duty, and my home base was at El Toro Marine Corps Air Station. So that put me into a number of different Marine categories. I've been in a schools battalion for a long time. Then I was in the Fleet Marine Force with the grunts. I was just a glorified grunt while I was in Vietnam, and then I went in the Air Wing, which is another whole new experience. By the way, Bob, I might point out too that Vietnam was the first war that officers were not the number one target for the enemy. Unfortunately, I was the number one target for the enemy because I was a radio operator. And radio operators were the number one target because we were the ones that could call in air support, naval gunfire, call in reinforcements. They did not want that communication getting out because they know there could be a quick reaction force. So radio operators are number one. And it's hard to miss a guy that's carrying a 10-foot antenna above his head. So it was easy to spot. Number two target were corpsmen, because they could fix up our guys so they could continue to fight. And they were number two for the enemy. And officers dropped to number three because anybody could lead. But corpsmen could fix you up to keep fighting, and a radio operator could call people in to kill you real quick. So it wasn't nice knowing that I was the number one target out there. that always stays in your mind, saying, boy, I hope nobody out there is looking for this antenna over my head.
Other than the colonel that you ended up connected up with later when he was a 4-star general, did you form any friendships over there while you were over in Vietnam? Friendships?
Actually, in my unit, I have one guy that I've stayed in very close contact. Well, I looked him up here a number of years ago on the internet. I found him. And we had gone through communication school together. And we were shipped together. We stayed together the whole time from right through communication school to our tour in Vietnam, because we landed together. He was a radio operator just like me, and it's quite a coincidence because our birthdays are the same day but 1 year apart. He was born December 1st, 1945, so he was 1 year younger than me. And he's living with his wife in Wisconsin now. And I send him a birthday card every year, and we exchange Christmas cards. And I called him on the phone one time and talked to him a little while. And there's that connection there.
Any others?
Not that we serve side by side with, which the closest people would be the communications platoon that I was in. Those were the guys I was closest to, and Joe is the only one that I've been able to maintain contact with or have contact with today. You really, it's kind of hard to make real close, hard, long-lasting friendships because when you go out, you don't know who's coming back and who isn't. Some might get evacuated because of wounds. They might go out in a body bag because they were killed. You're kind of leery about forming the real close relationships.
Right.
Because it can end real quick.
How'd you stay in touch with your family while you were there? And friends back home?
Well, the only way we had in those days, of course, which was before all the computers and Skype and all the things that are around today, where guys they're sitting in their camp, they can call their wife and kids and talk to them and see them on the screen and all that. All we had was mail, snail mail. And
FPO San Francisco, right?
FPO San Francisco. My mother sent me a care package every month. I didn't know when I was going to get it, because if we were on an operation and we were out for 2 weeks at a time, it might have got there the day we took off, and I wouldn't see it until 2 weeks later, whatever. And we didn't get our mail when we got back to the base camp until after our weapons were cleaned and our gear was cleaned. Those are the first 2 orders of business. Then you got your mail, and if there was a payday while you were gone, you had to go sign your pay and, all that good stuff. But always look forward to the letters and packages from home. That was our lifeline to what we called the world, because everybody looked forward to going back to the world. That's what we called the United States. That was the world. Because when you're in country and fighting for your life and you don't know if you're going to live from one day to the next, that's your long-term goal, is to go to the world. And mail was a big lifeline to people that were leading a normal life.
I imagine you rode home a lot whenever you were able to, right?
I went home on leave when I got home from Vietnam.
No, you rode home, I said. You probably rode home quite
I rode home, yes. I probably tried to get out. When you're back in your base camp, there's a limited number of things you do. So anytime we're back and not on patrol, you're standing radio watch, you're repairing a gear, you're running a switchboard, you're doing anything that has to do with communications, because everybody was expected to help everybody else out. If you were in the communications bracket, you all did everything you could to help each other. So that was first and foremost. And then other times, I'd write letters, we'd play poker or other card games, and you tried to keep your mind off of where you had just been and where you're going again. You tried to keep your mind occupied and don't dwell on those little secret compartments you put aside.
Right. Now, while you're at base camp, you have any recreation or off-duty pursuits that you were doing?
No, as I said,
Any card games or?
Yeah, we played cards. Once in a while, we could go in, when we were July, we could go into the village and maybe buy something to eat from the villagers. They had a couple little restaurants, and we could go in there and buy some of the local food and sit down, and always with our M14s by our side. And so there was limited things, it's not like here if I want to go to the movies or something like that. No.
Did you get in the R&R, and if so, what was that like?
Yeah, I finally did. You're supposed to go on R&R after 6 months, in a 6 to 7 month range, because that's supposed to be in your You're going to be out of the United States for 13 months. That you knew. If you're a lifer and you're making a career out of it, you might go home for a year and then come back and you have another 13 months to do. So in that 6 to 7 month range, you're supposed to go on R&R. I felt perversely kind of committed to doing what I was doing, and I turned down R&R a number of times, and finally the company first sergeant came up to me and he says, "Seguin, you're going on R&R." I said, "I don't really want to go, first sergeant." He says, "Sorry, the colonel says you're going." He says, "You got 30 minutes to pack a bag and get ready to leave." he says, these are your choices. And I can go to Australia, I can go to Hawaii, I can go to Hong Kong, or I can go to Bangkok. I said, but, he says, there's no buts. The colonel says you're going, or else you're going to go someplace you don't want to go. I think he meant the brig. So I picked Bangkok, and I went and spent 5 days in Bangkok. I buddied up with a friend of mine from Tanks, who I happened to make a certain friendship with. And you always, when you went on R&R, you never stayed alone. You were always with another guy. And so his name was Larry also. It's kind of funny. His name was Larry Williams. Mine was Larry Seguin. So I remained Larry, and he became Willie. People weren't confused when we were together. And we went to Bangkok together. And 5 days, just let it all hang out.
Were the natives friendly?
I'm sorry?
Were the natives friendly?
Some of them were more friendly than others. But,
okay, we don't have to go into detail on that one.
I'll tell you what, we had some great food while we were there, though. Really, it was a wonderful experience because they catered to the American soldiers. That was a big destination. That and Hong Kong were the two biggest ones, and we got treated well. I mean, I got to go to get a haircut, and they get a massage while you're getting a haircut, and drink beer and everything. And they had some fantastic restaurants. You couldn't believe some of the food that we ate. It was just unbelievable compared to eating sea rations and eating, in the villages. It's just, wow. But then you got to go back and start all over again.
Right. Now tell me how your tour ended. You do your last month at Marble Mountain, or how did
Yeah.
it work?
It was around the end of March, maybe the first week of April, right in that time frame. I say some of these dates are a little fuzzy in the mind, but we left Hill 69 in July, went down to the airstrip, and took C-130s up to Da Nang, landed at Da Nang, and we took another battalion took over our position on Hill 69 in July, and we went and relieved another battalion that was on Marble Mountain. The battalions constantly rotated.
The actual mountain itself, not the airstrip, which is also called Marble Mountain.
No, this is a mountain.
The mountain, real mountain.
It was
Marble Mountain.
Marble Mountain was, if I remember, is a little bit west of the Da Nang airstrip.
Right, but you had the Marble Mountain airstrip also.
Yeah, but we were up on the mountain.
You were in the mountain itself. Yeah. Okay, got you. Well, what was that like?
We ran a few patrols out of there. Nothing. While I was still there, major happened. Other than the fact that every day we had 5 o'clock Charlie that lobbed mortars onto our position. It was very heavily fortified, and it was kind of like an understanding between the enemy and us. At 5 o'clock, they were going to zero in their mortars, and they would lob mortars on us. So at 16:55 hours, first sergeant would be out running on, everybody inside. We get under cover and down in the fortifications, and they drop in about 8 or 10 mortars on us. They were all done by 17:05. We'd come back out and do what we were doing before. It was kind of a game. Okay, and then when I had about a week left, before I was due to rotate back, the colonel told me I wouldn't be going any more patrols, operations, or anything my last week. And
what was that like for your last week?
I just kind of laid back, not doing much of anything, just knowing that I wasn't going to be going anywhere until I had about, I think, down to 2 days. And then they sent me into Da Nang, and they had a whole section of the base for guys who are getting ready to go home. And you took all your gear down there.
What rank were you by that time?
I was still a PFC. As soon as I got back, I started making rank like crazy because they were starting to catch up. In fact, one time I hooked up with the general. We were talking about different things. And in fact, let me jump ahead a little bit here.
Okay.
We the day on Memorial Day when he was giving the speech and we were united and everything, after getting and talking to the crowd and the press and all that.
Which colonel was this now?
No, this is General Kelly, who was a lieutenant colonel when I served as his radio operator in Vietnam. You know, he became the
This is at the time when you met him as a general then?
Yeah.
From the newspaper world?
Yeah, he was retired 4-star general at the time. So I said to him, or he said to me, he says, let's go outside. And of course, there's Secret Service there because it's the library, and there was a couple bodyguards for him. And he says, we'd like a little privacy. So he took us out on this little terrace, and we started to just talk and reminisce a little bit. And he says, you know, I still remember when you threw me out of that chopper. I said, oh, yeah, Operation Utah. I said, well, the guys needed you more than they needed me because he was waving everybody out. We're taking fire like crazy. The chopper's shaking. And it carried pilot, co-pilot, and a gunner on port and starboard side, UH-34D, and seven Marines transported. And this was a headquarters group. And 1, 2, they all jumped down. We were jumping out 10 to 20 feet above the rice paddy. The pilot didn't want to go down any closer because we were taking so much fire. And they all started going out. And of course, I'm waiting because I'm supposed to be with him. And I was on one side of the door, and he was in front of the cockpit on the other side of the door going out. And the starboard gunner is firing this M60 at the enemy. And Colonel goes like this, and I go, and he said, so I just grabbed him and threw him out the door, and then I jumped out. So that's what he says. I remember when you threw me out of that chopper. I says, what are you going to do, General, bust me? And he looks at me, and my sergeant stripes and the hash marks, and he says, no, you earned your stripes. He said, no way I busted you. He says, in fact, I should have promoted you while we were over there. He said, I'm sorry I didn't. I says, not to worry. I says, I got it. I said, my goal in the Marine Corps is to make sergeant. And I said, I eventually made it. And he says, I'm glad.
Tell me about the Freedom Bird going home. What was that like that last day and getting on the bird and going out of there?
You know, what I remember of it was that I couldn't talk. I couldn't. It was kind of surreal. We flew from Da Nang. We flew to Iwakuni, which was in Japan. Iwakuni Air Base. It's where the 1st Marine Division was. 1st Marine Air Wing was headquartered. That was headquarters. So we had the base there, and we flew into there, and then we flew from there to Okinawa. Okinawa for 2 days, and then we flew back to United States, landed El Toro.
Okay, how much of it was military transportation, and how much of it was civilian?
It was all civilian.
All civilian.
Yeah. And you know the flight, the flight from Da Nang to Iwakuni to refuel, and then to Okinawa. It was a little surreal. I mean, I couldn't form any coherent thoughts. All I could think of was that I'm not in a combat zone anymore. That if I can get far enough away from Da Nang, people are going to stop trying to kill me every day. I'm not going to have that worry 24/7. That was the only thing that was on my mind, was people weren't going to try to kill me. And after so long in country, it was kind of hard to comprehend that. Maybe somebody that might be watching this video might not comprehend that, but it becomes an ingrained part of your life. And to think that all of a sudden that's going to stop is kind of hard to comprehend.
If it helps any, I understand it.
I'm sorry?
If it helps any, I understand it.
You were there. You can understand it.
I do.
But that's a momentous thing, to think that after so long, people aren't going to try and kill you every day. So that's basically all I could think about, was from Da Nang to Japan to Okinawa.
How long did you stay on Okinawa?
2 days.
What was that like?
We got some debriefing, quite a bit of debriefing. Cleaned what gear we could. They went through everything, make sure we weren't smuggling back weapons or grenades or anything, or any other illegal substances. And then we all got another bird and took off. Went straight from Okinawa to El Toro, Marine Corps Air Station. We came off the plane and literally to a man, everybody came down. Now, there weren't no jetways or anything. You gotta remember, this was a stairway you walk down onto the tarmac. And
Usually Continental Airlines, by the way, in case you remember.
it could very well be, but I don't remember that part of it, the individual airlines. But to a man, everybody spread out and dropped down and kissed the ground. That's something I'll never forget. Very emotional, and probably most of us were crying because we were home. We were back in the world.
Now, what was your first few days back there like? Were they debriefing you in El Toro or what?
Yes, I spent 5 days. First off, you have to wait for orders. And it takes a while to figure out where the Marine Corps is going to need you, particularly after you're in combat, where that experience will be most beneficial for the Corps, because we're always serving at the will of the Commandant in the Marine Corps, wherever we can best serve the Corps. And so there was that, wait for orders, but I also got extensive debriefing from the military and from another government agency, because at that time I only had a secret clearance. I had a permanent secret clearance after I was cleared by the FBI when I was in communications school, and I had a lot of things up here. They want to make sure that I started scrubbing them out of my mind. They told me what I could talk about, what I couldn't talk about, and I had some kind of debriefing every day I was there. And then my orders came in, and of all places, I was given 30 days leave, and I was coming back to El Toro again. That's where I was going to be stationed at. So I got my 30 days leave and checked back into El Toro.
So you went home for 30 days?
Yeah, that was...
what was that like?
Boy, I knew I was going to see my family. I did something that we weren't supposed to do the whole time I was in Vietnam. We're not supposed to have anything personal on us except our dog tags. And nothing to do with family or anything like that, but I had a little piece of plastic, and wrapped up in it was my baby brother. He was born in February of '62, and his name was Dan, and I named my oldest son Dan after him, because I told myself every day, this is what I'm fighting for. I'm fighting for my family, especially my little baby brother, so I can get home and see him. And I carried his picture with me every day I was there, no matter where I was. And I landed in Detroit. I called a cousin of mine who was a year older than me, and he had served in the Navy. And I called him and I said, Chuck, I said, this is Larry. I just got home and landed in Detroit. Can you come pick me up? And he says, what airline you at? And I told him, and he lived about 20 minutes from the airport, so it didn't take him long to get there, and we hugged each other, and he said, I'm so glad to see you're back. And he says, let's go see your mom and brothers and sisters and your dad. And I says, let's do it. So we got to my house, and we were standing up on the front porch, and this is funny. It's how I arranged it with Chuck. I stood off to the side of the door so he couldn't see me. And Chuck knocked on the door. My mother answered the door. She says, Chuck, what are you doing here? And he says, oh, hi, Aunt Shirley. He said, I was just in the area. I thought I'd stop in and visit. She says, come on in. So she walks into the living room. He says, I brought a friend with me. Can he come in? And she's turned around and says, sure, any friend of yours, a friend of ours, Chuck. So he opened the door, and I walked in, and I was in my dress uniform, and everybody's mouth just went and dropped open, and then the screaming and yelling and ensued, and the hugs, and all that good stuff, and everybody's in tears. And it was a special moment, very special moment.
I bet that 30 days.
By then, I
went
knew I
fast.
was really home.
Yeah, I bet that 30 days went fast, though, didn't it?
Yeah, there was so much to do and friends to see and family to visit with and eat with. It did, because it was like constantly moving and doing things. It just, and next thing I know, it's time to get on a plane and head back to El Toro. It was like, I can't have been here 30 days. But I had been. It was time to go back and serve the Marine Corps again.
Now, how much longer did you have of active duty from that time? I see here that you actually landed in the United States on May 1st, 1966.
Yeah, that's around the day I could be off by 2 days one way or the other, but it was around May 1st of 66. And my active duty was going until the middle of October of 67. So to June, July, August, and October. So I had about 1 year, 5.5 months.
Right.
Before I got my not an honorable discharge yet, my end of active service. Discharge from end of active service. Your honorable discharge comes when you end your fulfillment of 6-year obligation you signed on for, which actually happened in June of 1969.
Right. Okay. And then once you got out of the Marine Corps, what were your duties for the last year and a half? What did you do?
I was working with some Well, I got sent TAD down to Coronado to help train reservists for 3 months right off the bat. And then I went back up to El Toro, and I was with one communications outfit. We were serving individual squadrons, an individual squadron base, not part of the base. I was part of the communications for one of the squadrons. And, by the way, when I got sent to El Toro, my first day, from El Toro down to Coronado to train the reservists, first day I was there, I got promoted to Lance Corporal. And then 6 months later, I got meritorious promoted to corporal, and 9 months later, I was selected for sergeant. So my I don't know why it hadn't happened first, but we were trying to stay alive for a year in Vietnam, and I wasn't worried about it. All I wanted to do was stay alive and come home. And I thank God every day for bringing me home with all my body parts intact. And the rank came real quick because my proficiency and conduct marks were off the charts. They were perfect. And so I should have come back a sergeant, but that's neither here nor there. We were just trying to stay alive that first year and learn how to fight this war. But around the first part of January of 67, was actually requested by base headquarters, which was El Toro was headquarters for 3rd Marine Air Wing, and that I come and serve on the general staff, commanding general of 3rd Marine Air Wing, who was Major General Thayer. And I worked on his personal communications staff, and I found out the reason why was that they were waiting for the FBI to finish another investigation on me, so they give me a top secret clearance, because I needed top secret to serve on the general staff. And so I got the top secret clearance, and that's when I went to work for the general and worked in 3rd Marine Air Wing base communications. So I was privy to eyes-only material coming over for the general, and I served on his staff until my active duty enlistment ended in October.
Okay. Well, once you got out,
got out of active duty.
You got separated from active duty.
Okay, well, I separated from active duty. Of course, I still had a year and 8 months to put in inactive reserve, but I didn't have to belong to any formal unit. My name was still on file in case I got called back up to war.
Right.
But I had gotten married earlier that year in May of 67 to my first wife, And we moved we lived in near the base in the city of Westminster, which was just a very short ride from El Toro. My mother-in-law at that time, they had a horse boarding ranch that we lived on, and we packed up. She had a Ford Big Dually crew cab and a little rounded travel trailer. It only consisted of a double bed and a few cupboards inside. This was really a small trailer, and in fact, we couldn't even stand up straight and it stooped a little bit. We packed up everything and we drove cross country from California to my home in Detroit, Michigan, and we lived a couple days with my mom and dad. It was pretty crowded yet, and then we moved in with my grandmother, and because my wife was expecting a baby about 30 days after my discharge from active duty. Yeah, that was my oldest son. And I was able to walk back into a union job that I had taken a leave of absence for, which they allow you for the military service. And I walked right back into my civilian job in the supermarket business again. And so that everything picked up, including my insurance coverage. So everything was covered for doctor, hospital, baby. Everything was paid for by the union, or covered by the union insurance. And I worked in a supermarket, worked in one supermarket for 6 months, and then I met up with somebody that I had worked with previously in another chain, and he said they were looking for managers, and why didn't I come back and work for them? So I did that for 14 months, and then I got, at that time, grocery managers, the store supervisor, and the two grocery managers who were the assistant store managers were non-unionized, and I was working 70 hours a week for what I didn't think was real good pay. And I got into sales, and I went into beverage sales in the beer and wine industry for 4 years. And then I left there and I went and worked in a factory for a year. And by this time I'd been home about 6.5 months, and the factory went on strike, and I was walking a picket line in the middle of winter. And I said, I'm not going to take this anymore. We called my mother-in-law at that time and said, we want to come back to California. So she sent us fare for a train and came back to California, got back here in April of 1974, and been here since. So I've been back for 41 years now.
That reminds me, in April 30th of 1975, when the war ended, I think you were on a Coca-Cola route salesman at that time.
Yeah. After I had been here back to California about 2 weeks, I got a job with Coca-Cola, and was a route salesman for them, driving a bobtail truck. Was a salesman and the delivery guy, and in charge of everything, and it was all commission, everything. And I was working for them when the war officially ended, and the embassy fell in Saigon.
And what was your reaction at that time to that?
To the best of my recollection, it was like, thank God that officially ends it. Because when I was there, we were winning. And this is my personal opinion, but it's also the opinion of many, many of my friends who served over there, that I belong to a Vietnam veterans group with, and other veterans I've talked to. We could have won that war. When I left in '66, we were winning. The politicians lost the war for us. Politicians shouldn't be fighting a war from Washington. The war should be fought on the battleground where it's being placed. The military leaders should be put in charge and be given the order to win the war at all costs. That's my personal belief, and other veterans I've talked to believe the same thing.
How would you consider your readjustment to civilian life? How did that go overall?
It wasn't easy. I was starting to show the first effects. I didn't know what it was at the time. It turns out it was PTSD. I had a temper. I was having anxiety attacks, panic attacks. I had my first one in Vietnam. I got medevaced out of the middle of a battle in Vietnam because I was having anxiety attacks from all the shooting and fighting and everything else. I got medevaced out to a hospital ship. And they continued, they got worse, and I'd have, let's say, flashbacks to battles where I would just lose it. And my temper I'd go off on people, and it was difficult. And the nightmares started, and I drinking more, because when you drank until you passed out, you have a blackout, you tend not to dream. And after living in the bottom of a whiskey bottle for 15 years, I woke up one day, and it was like a religious experience. I felt that God was in the room talking to me. I know he was. I could hear him. And he was telling me I didn't have much time left, that he was going to take me because of the way I was living my life. And I'll tell you, it scared the living hell out of me. And that day, I went to my first AA meeting. And I got sober.